In the unforgiving mountains of Afghanistan, where death lurks behind every ridge and silence can mean the difference between life and annihilation, a team of America's most elite warriors found themselves trapped in what seemed like their final moments. The enemy had them surrounded, ammunition was running low, and hope was fading faster than the desert sun. But sometimes, salvation comes from the most unexpected places, from a guardian angel who speaks only in the language of precision and operates from the shadows where legends are born. What happened next would become one of the most extraordinary rescue operations in modern military history, a story of brotherhood, sacrifice, and the mysterious sniper who appeared when all seemed lost. This is not just another war story. This is the account of how 5 perfectly placed shots changed everything, and how a concealed protector turned certain death into miraculous survival. The mountains would remember that day. The SEALs would never forget it. And somewhere in those same hills, a silent guardian continues to watch over those who need protection most. The sun had barely crested the jagged peaks of the Hindu Kush Mountains when Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison checked his watch for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. The digital display read 0547 hours, and already the temperature was climbing toward what would become another scorching day in northeastern Afghanistan. Morrison adjusted his tactical gear one final time and looked across at his team of Navy SEALs, each man a carefully selected weapon in America's fight against terror. Team Bravo consisted of 6 of the most highly trained operatives in the world. Besides Morrison, there was Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez, a communications specialist whose steady hands could maintain radio contact even under the heaviest fire. Petty Officer First Class Tommy Chin served as their explosives expert, carrying enough C4 to level a small building. The team's medic, Hospital Corpsman Second Class David Doc Williams, had saved more lives in combat zones than he could count. Their sniper, Petty Officer Second Class Ryan Cooper, could put a bullet through a quarter at 800 yards. Finally, there was Petty Officer First Class Alex Thompson, their point man, and the youngest member of the team at just 24 years old. The mission briefing had seemed straightforward enough when they received it 48 hours earlier at Bagram Air Base. Intelligence reports indicated that a high-value target, a Taliban commander known as the Ghost, was operating from a compound in the remote Kunar province. This particular commander had been responsible for coordinating attacks against coalition forces for the past 18 months, and his elimination was considered a top priority. The compound sat in a valley surrounded by steep mountain slopes, accessible only through a narrow pass that the locals called Devil's Throat. What made this mission particularly challenging was the timing. The target would only be at the compound for a limited window. Intelligence suggested he would arrive late the previous evening and depart before noon today. This meant the team had to move fast, strike hard, and extract cleanly before enemy reinforcements could arrive. The nearest coalition support was over 50 miles away, making this a truly independent operation. As the 6-man team moved through the pre-dawn darkness, their boots found purchase on the rocky terrain with the practiced silence of men who had walked through similar landscapes dozens of times before. Each step was deliberate, calculated to avoid loose stones that might tumble down the mountainside and alert any sentries to their presence. Morrison used hand signals to communicate, a language as familiar to his men as their native English. The approach to the target compound required a 3-hour hike through terrain that would challenge even experienced mountain climbers. The team carried nearly 80 pounds of equipment each: weapons, ammunition, communication gear, medical supplies, and enough water to sustain them through the operation and potential emergency extraction. Despite the load, they moved with the fluid grace that comes only from years of training and countless missions together. Rodriguez monitored their communication channels through encrypted radio equipment, listening for any chatter that might indicate enemy awareness of their presence. The airwaves remained silent except for the occasional check-in from their operations center back at base. Chun periodically checked his demolition equipment, ensuring the sensitive electronic components hadn't been damaged during their movement across the rough terrain. Doc Williams kept a constant eye on his teammates, watching for signs of fatigue or heat exhaustion that could compromise the mission. Cooper, their sniper, moved with particular attention to the terrain around them. His trained eyes continuously scanned the ridgelines and elevated positions, looking for potential sniper nests or observation posts that might threaten the team. Thompson, as point man, stayed 50 meters ahead of the group, using night vision equipment to identify the safest route while watching for booby traps or improvised explosive devices. The landscape they traversed was both beautiful and deadly. Ancient stone formations jutted skyward like the fingers of buried giants, while deep ravines carved by centuries of flash floods created natural obstacles that had to be carefully navigated. The mountains held an otherworldly silence that was broken only by the occasional cry of a hawk or the distant bleating of goats from some unseen village. As they climbed higher, the air grew thinner, and Morrison noticed Thompson beginning to breathe more heavily. The young SEAL was pushing himself hard to maintain their pace, but the combination of altitude, weight, and stress was taking its toll. Morrison made the decision to call for a brief rest, using tactical hand signals to bring the team to a halt behind a cluster of large boulders. During their 5-minute break, Rodriguez received an encrypted message from base operations. The intelligence picture had been updated. Aerial surveillance now showed increased vehicle traffic around the target compound. This could mean their target had arrived early, or it might indicate that enemy forces were gathering for reasons unknown. Either way, it added urgency to their mission timeline. Morrison gathered his men in a tight circle and shared the updated intelligence in whispers barely audible above the mountain breeze. Each SEAL absorbed the information and made mental adjustments to their individual preparations. Chun double-checked his explosive charges, ensuring they were properly armed and ready for immediate use. Cooper verified his rifle's scope settings and confirmed his ballistic calculations for the altitude and environmental conditions. Doc Williams redistributed some medical supplies to ensure he could provide immediate trauma care if needed. The team resumed movement with renewed focus. They had been operating together for over 2 years, and each man knew exactly what his teammates were thinking without need for verbal communication. This level of trust and coordination was what separated elite special operations units from conventional forces. They moved as a single organism, each member fulfilling his role while remaining aware of the whole. As they approached the final ridge before their target area, the first light of dawn began to paint the eastern horizon in shades of orange and pink. This created both opportunity and risk. They would have better visibility for their assault, but they would also be more easily spotted if enemy sentries were alert. Morrison made the decision to accelerate their timeline, pushing the team to reach their assault position before full daylight exposed them. The target compound came into view as they crested the final ridge. Intelligence photos had prepared them for the layout, but seeing it with their own eyes allowed for final tactical adjustments. The compound consisted of a main building constructed of local stone and mud brick, surrounded by a low wall that provided minimal defensive value. Several smaller outbuildings were scattered around the perimeter, and Morrison could see at least 2 vehicles parked near the main entrance. Through his binoculars, Cooper identified multiple heat signatures inside the main building using his thermal scope. The count matched intelligence estimates. Approximately 8 to 10 individuals were present, which likely included their target plus several bodyguards or associates. No sentries were visible outside the compound, but that didn't mean they weren't there. Experienced fighters in this region were experts at concealment. Morrison assigned positions to each team member based on their individual specialties and the terrain features around the compound. Rodriguez would establish a communication post on high ground to maintain contact with base and coordinate any necessary air support. Chun would approach from the north side, where he could breach the compound's wall if needed. Cooper would take a sniper position with clear sight lines to the main building. Doc Williams would remain mobile to provide medical support wherever needed. Thompson would accompany Morrison in the direct assault on the main building. As each man moved to his assigned position, Morrison felt the familiar mixture of anticipation and calm that preceded combat operations. His heart rate elevated slightly, his senses sharpened, and his mind focused entirely on the immediate tactical situation. This was what he had trained for, what his team had trained for, and what their country needed them to do. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Cooper would eliminate any external threats with precision rifle fire, Chun would breach the compound's defenses if necessary, and Morrison's assault team would capture or kill the target while minimizing civilian casualties. Rodriguez would coordinate their extraction once the mission was complete, and Doc Williams would handle any medical emergencies that arose. What none of them knew as they settled into their assault positions was that they were walking into a carefully planned trap. The increased vehicle traffic that base operations had reported wasn't random. It was evidence that their target had discovered the planned operation and was using himself as bait to lure American Special Operations Forces into an ambush. Hidden in the surrounding mountains, nearly 50 Taliban fighters waited in concealed positions with clear fields of fire covering every possible approach to the compound. The Ghost had earned his nickname not just through his ability to evade capture, but through his tactical brilliance in turning hunters into the hunted. Today, he intended to score the biggest victory of his career by eliminating an entire team of America's most elite warriors. The compound below wasn't his headquarters, it was his killing ground. As Morrison gave the final hand signal to begin their assault, several things happened simultaneously in the mountains around them. Hidden rifle barrels shifted toward their positions, radio communications crackled with enemy coordination, and somewhere in the distance, a concealed observer began tracking their every movement through a rifle scope of his own. But this observer wasn't part of the Taliban ambush. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test everything these SEALs had learned about survival, brotherhood, and the thin line between life and death in the world's most dangerous places. In the next few minutes, their carefully planned mission would transform into a desperate fight for survival, and their rescue would come from the most unexpected source imaginable. The first indication that something was terribly wrong came from Cooper's position. Through his scope, the sniper had been tracking movement inside the compound when his peripheral vision caught the glint of sunlight reflecting off metal approximately 400 meters to his left. His combat instincts, honed through dozens of missions, immediately recognized the signature of a rifle scope catching the morning light. Cooper's blood ran cold as he realized what this meant. They weren't the hunters in this scenario. They were the prey. Without breaking his shooting position, Cooper whispered into his throat microphone, "Command, this is Overwatch. We have company. Multiple positions. This smells like an ambush." His words carried the controlled urgency of a professional who had just discovered that death was much closer than anyone had realized. Morrison received the transmission and felt his stomach drop. In the span of seconds, he processed the implications and began issuing new orders to his team. All units, freeze current positions. Overwatch, give me numbers and locations. His mind raced through tactical options while his body remained perfectly still behind the boulder that provided his only concealment. Cooper began a systematic scan of the surrounding terrain, using his scope's magnification to identify enemy positions. What he discovered was far worse than a simple ambush. It was a sophisticated kill zone that had been carefully prepared. "Command, I count at least 12 separate firing positions on the high ground. North Ridge has at least 4 shooters. East Slope shows 3 more. South side is partially concealed, but I can see movement in the rocks. We're completely surrounded." The tactical situation was every special operations soldier's nightmare. Team Bravo was positioned in low ground with enemy fighters controlling all the elevated positions around them. Their assault positions, chosen for optimal approach to the compound, had become death traps. Withdrawal would require crossing open ground under direct fire from multiple directions. Staying put meant being systematically eliminated by enemies who could fire down on them from protected positions. Rodriguez, monitoring communications from his Overwatch position, suddenly detected encrypted radio chatter on Taliban frequencies. His language training allowed him to understand fragments of the conversation, and what he heard confirmed their worst fears. "Command, enemy comms indicate this was planned. They knew we were coming. Estimate 40 to 50 fighters in position around us." Morrison's tactical training kicked into high gear. With his team spread across nearly 300 meters of terrain and enemies controlling the high ground, conventional extraction procedures wouldn't work. They needed to create chaos, disrupt enemy coordination, and fight their way out before being overwhelmed by superior numbers. "Chun, can you reach the compound wall without exposing yourself?" Chun evaluated his position and the terrain between himself and the target building. Negative, command. Too much open ground. I'd be cut down before covering 50 meters. His demolition expertise was useless if he couldn't reach a position to employ it effectively. The first shot came without warning. A high-velocity rifle round struck the rock formation inches from Thompson's head, spraying stone fragments across his face and drawing blood from several small cuts. The young SEAL pressed himself deeper into his concealment while reporting, taking fire from the north ridge. Single shooter, approximately 600 meters. Morrison knew they had perhaps minutes before the enemy coordinated a simultaneous assault from all directions. All units, prepare for immediate extraction. Overwatch, I need you to start creating problems for those shooters. Everyone else, covering fire on my mark. We're moving to Rally Point Alpha. Rally Point Alpha was a defensive position they had identified during their approach, a cluster of large boulders approximately 200 meters back toward their insertion point. Reaching it would require crossing open ground while under fire, but it offered better protection than their current positions and a potential route toward higher ground. Cooper began engaging enemy positions with methodical precision. His first shot eliminated a Taliban fighter who had exposed himself while trying to get a better angle on Thompson's position. The suppressed rifle produced only a soft whisper, but the effect was immediate. The enemy fighter collapsed behind his rock formation and didn't move again. One down on North Ridge, Cooper reported calmly. The enemy response was immediate and overwhelming. Automatic rifle fire erupted from multiple positions simultaneously, filling the air with the distinctive crack of bullets passing overhead. Morrison realized their concealment was rapidly becoming inadequate as enemy fire became more accurate and coordinated. Move, move, move. Morrison shouted into his microphone while breaking from his position in a combat sprint toward Rally Point Alpha. His heavy equipment bounced with each step as he zigzagged across the rocky terrain, trying to present a difficult target while covering ground as quickly as possible. Thompson followed immediately, his youth serving him well as he matched Morrison's pace despite the weight of his gear. Bullets struck the ground around them, sending up puffs of dust and stone chips, but both SEALs reached the boulder cluster without being hit. They immediately took defensive positions and began returning fire to cover their teammates' movement. Doc Williams was next, sprinting across the open ground with his medical pack secured tightly to prevent equipment from bouncing loose. Halfway to the rally point, a burst of automatic fire from the east slope caught him in the open. Williams dove behind a small rock formation, breathing heavily but uninjured. I'm pinned down 30 meters short of Alpha, he reported. Rodriguez faced the longest movement, having to cover nearly 150 meters from his communication position to reach the rally point. As he prepared to move, enemy fire intensified dramatically. The Taliban fighters had clearly identified the Americans' intended destination and were concentrating their efforts on preventing the team from reaching better cover. Chun provided covering fire for Rodriguez's movement, using his assault rifle to suppress enemy positions on the south slope. His accurate shooting forced several Taliban fighters to seek deeper cover, reducing their ability to engage the team's communication specialist during his vulnerable sprint across open ground. Rodriguez made his move, running in short bounds between available cover while carrying his heavy radio equipment. Enemy bullets tracked his movement, striking rocks and dirt all around him. 50 meters from the rally point, a rifle round caught the radio antenna mounted on his backpack, shattering the equipment, but leaving Rodriguez uninjured. Radios down, Rodriguez called out as he reached the boulder cluster. No communication with base, no air support, no extraction coordination. The loss of their primary communication system elevated their situation from dangerous to potentially fatal. Cooper continued engaging enemy positions from his original sniper position, but he was rapidly becoming the focus of concentrated return fire. Multiple Taliban fighters had identified his location and were systematically destroying his concealment with sustained rifle fire. Command, I need to relocate. Positions compromised. Taking too much heat. Morrison evaluated their tactical situation as bullets continued to impact around their position. 3 team members had reached Rally Point Alpha. One was pinned down 30 meters away, one was under heavy fire, and one was fighting from an exposed position. Their communication with base was severed, their extraction plan was useless, and they were outnumbered by at least 8-1. "Chun, can you create a diversion with your demo charges?" Morrison asked, hoping to disrupt enemy coordination long enough for his remaining team members to reach defensive positions. Chun considered the request while examining his available explosives. "I can create noise and smoke, but I'd have to expose myself to throw the charges effectively. Might buy us 30 seconds, maybe a minute of confusion." Before Morrison could respond, the tactical situation deteriorated further. A coordinated assault began as Taliban fighters advanced from multiple directions simultaneously. The enemy had apparently decided to close the distance and overwhelm the Americans through superior numbers rather than continue the long-range engagement. Doc Williams, still pinned behind his small rock formation, reported movement advancing on his position. Multiple fighters moving down from the east slope. "I count at least 6, maybe 8. They'll have me flanked in less than 2 minutes. Thompson, the youngest member of the team, looked at Morrison with eyes that reflected both fear and determination. He had trained for situations like this, but training couldn't fully prepare someone for the reality of being surrounded by enemies who wanted nothing more than to kill him and his teammates. Morrison made a decision that would define the rest of his career. Instead of ordering a fighting withdrawal that might save some of his men while sacrificing others, he chose to make their stand at Rally Point Alpha. "All units, converge on Alpha. We hold here until we can establish communication or air support arrives. Cooper, Doc, get to our position now. We'll cover you." Cooper abandoned his sniper position and began a fighting withdrawal toward the rally point, engaging targets as opportunities presented themselves while moving through the rocky terrain. His movement attracted intense enemy fire, but his training in escape and evasion served him well as he used every available piece of cover during his movement. Doc Williams prepared for his sprint to the rally point, knowing he would have to cross 30 meters of open ground under direct observation by multiple enemy fighters. As he gathered himself for the run, automatic weapon fire erupted from a position he hadn't previously identified. The Taliban fighters advancing on his position had reached effective range. The situation had become critical. Team Bravo was scattered, outgunned, and facing an enemy that knew the terrain intimately while possessing overwhelming numerical superiority. Their training, equipment, and experience were their only advantages in what was rapidly becoming a fight for survival. Morrison keyed his emergency beacon, sending an automated distress signal that would reach coalition forces even without their primary radio equipment. The signal would bring help eventually, but eventually might be too late for his team. They needed a miracle, and they needed it now. In the distance, unnoticed by either the SEALs or their Taliban attackers, a lone figure adjusted his rifle scope and began calculating wind speed, distance, and bullet drop for what would become the most important shots of his career. The guardian angel that Morrison's team desperately needed was already in position, but his intervention would come at the moment when all hope seemed lost. The sound of incoming mortar rounds changed everything. The distinctive whistle of artillery descending toward their position sent ice through Morrison's veins as he realized the Taliban had brought indirect fire capability to the engagement. The first explosion landed 50 meters short of Rally Point Alpha, but the adjustment for the second round would likely be deadly accurate. "Incoming. Take cover," Morrison shouted as his team pressed themselves against the largest boulders they could find. The second mortar round landed 20 meters away, close enough that the blast wave knocked dust and debris over their position and left their ears ringing. Rock fragments peppered the area around them, and Thompson felt a sharp pain in his shoulder where a piece of shrapnel had found its mark. Doc Williams reached Rally Point Alpha during the chaos following the mortar strike, diving into the boulder cluster just as automatic weapon fire resumed from multiple directions. He immediately began treating Thompson's wound while trying to assess the tactical situation. "It's superficial," he reported after examining Thompson's injury. "Bleeding's controlled, full mobility maintained." Cooper was still fighting his way toward their position when the third mortar round landed directly where he had been positioned 30 seconds earlier. The blast obliterated his former fighting position and sent a clear message that the enemy had multiple ways to kill them if direct small arms fire didn't succeed. Morrison tried to establish communication using their backup radio system, but the equipment had been damaged during their movement under fire. Rodriguez, status on communications? He asked, hoping their specialist could repair the damage or establish contact through alternative means. Rodriguez examined their communication equipment with growing frustration. Primary antenna is destroyed. Secondary system has internal damage from either shrapnel or impact. I can get local communication between team members, but nothing reaches beyond line of sight. The harsh reality was that they were completely cut off from outside support. The tactical situation continued deteriorating as Taliban fighters closed their encirclement. What had begun as a long-range engagement was transforming into close-quarters combat, where the Americans' technological advantages became less significant. Morrison could see enemy fighters moving through the rocks less than 100 meters away, using fire and movement tactics that indicated professional military training. Chen had been counting his remaining ammunition and explosives, preparing for what might be their final stand. Command, I have enough C4 to create a significant distraction, maybe clear a withdrawal route if we can coordinate it properly. But we need to move immediately after detonation, and we'd be moving toward higher ground controlled by the enemy. The idea of fighting uphill against entrenched enemies armed with mortars and automatic weapons seemed like suicide, but staying in their current position meant certain death once the enemy mortar fire became accurate. Morrison weighed their options while bullets continued striking the rocks around them with increasing frequency. Cooper finally reached their defensive position, sliding behind the boulder cluster with his rifle and remaining ammunition. Estimate 20-plus enemy fighters have us under direct observation. They're coordinating movement to get closer. Some of them are carrying RPGs. The addition of rocket-propelled grenades to the enemy's arsenal meant their boulder cover might not protect them much longer. Doc Williams finished treating Thompson's wound and began checking the rest of the team for injuries they might not have noticed in the heat of combat. Adrenaline could mask significant trauma, and he needed to ensure everyone was capable of fighting or moving if an opportunity for escape presented itself. Morrison gathered his team in the center of their defensive position, keeping his voice low to avoid giving enemy fighters audio cues about their exact location. Gentlemen, I'm not going to sugarcoat our situation. We're surrounded, outgunned, and cut off from support. Our emergency beacon is active, but help is hours away at best. Thompson, despite his wound and his youth, spoke up with surprising steadiness. Sir, what are our options? His question reflected the professionalism that had earned him a place on this elite team. We have two choices, Morrison replied. We can fight from this position until we run out of ammunition or they overwhelm us through superior numbers. Or we can attempt a breakout toward higher ground and try to establish a defensive position that gives us better fields of fire. Rodriguez had been monitoring enemy radio communications with his damaged equipment and offered additional intelligence. Their commander is coordinating a final assault for approximately 15 minutes from now. They want to finish this quickly before any coalition aircraft respond to our emergency beacon. Chen calculated the timing for his explosive diversion. If we're going to move, we need to do it in the next 5 minutes. After that, they'll be too close for me to use demolitions without risking our own people. Cooper had been studying the terrain around their position, looking for potential routes that might offer concealment during a movement to better ground. There's a dried stream bed about 200 meters northeast of our position. It leads toward higher elevation and might provide some concealment if we can reach it. The plan that emerged was desperate, but represented their best chance for survival. Chen would detonate his remaining explosives to create confusion and suppress enemy observation. The team would then move as quickly as possible toward the stream bed Cooper had identified, fighting through any enemy positions that blocked their route. Once they reached higher ground, they would establish a new defensive position and attempt to hold until help arrived. Morrison looked at each of his men, seeing determination mixed with the acknowledgement of their probable fate. This is going to be the fight of our lives. Stay close, watch your sectors, and remember your training. We've been through worse situations than this. His last statement wasn't entirely true, but leadership sometimes required projecting confidence even when hope was minimal. As they prepared for what might be their final movement, each SEAL conducted personal equipment checks and made mental preparations for close-quarters combat. Thompson tested his wounded shoulder and confirmed he could handle his weapon effectively. Rodriguez secured his damaged communication equipment in case they could repair it later. Doc Williams redistributed medical supplies to ensure he could treat trauma injuries during movement. Chun armed his demolition charges and prepared for the most important explosion of his career. The timing had to be perfect, too early, and the enemy would have time to reorganize before the team moved. Too late, and advancing Taliban fighters would be close enough to engage them during the vulnerable moments of their breakout attempt. Cooper made final adjustments to his rifle scope and confirmed his ammunition count. As their designated marksman, he would be responsible for eliminating any enemy fighters who threatened to stop their movement toward the streambed. His shooting would need to be perfect because second chances wouldn't exist. Morrison activated his GPS unit to mark their current position and planned route, ensuring that any recovery team would know where to look for them if the breakout failed. He also recorded a brief message on his personal voice recorder, a final communication for his family in case they didn't survive the next 30 minutes. The sound of approaching voices indicated that Taliban fighters were getting closer to their position. Time was running out for their breakout attempt. Morrison gave Chin the signal to prepare his charges while the rest of the team made ready for immediate movement. As Chun armed the final explosive device, a series of distinct rifle shots echoed across the valley from an unexpected direction. The shots came from extreme long range, and their acoustic signature was different from any weapon the SEALs carried. More importantly, the incoming small arms fire that had been steadily increasing suddenly diminished significantly. Cooper looked through his scope toward the area where the shots had originated, trying to identify their source. The angle and distance suggested a sniper position more than 800 meters away on a ridge that neither the SEALs nor the Taliban controlled. Someone else was in these mountains, and that someone possessed both the skill and equipment necessary for extreme long-range precision shooting. Rodriguez reported a change in enemy radio communications. Command, enemy chatter indicates they're taking casualties from an unknown source. They're calling for repositioning to deal with a sniper threat from the West Ridge. Morrison felt a mixture of hope and confusion. Cooper, can you identify the shooter? Negative, Command. Too far away, too much atmospheric distortion. But whoever it is knows what they're doing. That was precision shooting under difficult conditions. The mysterious intervention had created exactly the opportunity they needed. Enemy attention was divided, their coordination was disrupted, and their confidence was shaken by an unexpected threat they couldn't immediately locate or counter. Morrison made the decision to execute their breakout immediately before the tactical advantage could be lost. Move now. Chun, blow the charges. Everyone else, follow me toward the streambed. Cooper, provide overwatch during our movement. Morrison emerged from their defensive position with his assault rifle ready, leading his team toward what might be salvation or might be another killing ground. The explosions that followed created exactly the chaos Chun had promised, but, more importantly, they masked the continued precision shooting of their unknown benefactor who was systematically eliminating Taliban fighters from his concealed position on the distant ridge 837 meters away. Staff Sergeant Marcus Ghost Patterson adjusted his breathing and prepared for the most important shot of his military career. Through the scope of his customized M24 sniper rifle, he had been watching the developing situation for the past 20 minutes, calculating distances, wind patterns, and target priorities while remaining completely invisible to both the American Special Operations Team and their Taliban attackers. Patterson was not supposed to be in this valley. His official mission was a solo reconnaissance operation 30 kilometers to the north, gathering intelligence on enemy supply routes for a larger operation plan for the following month. But his route had been compromised by unexpected enemy patrols, forcing him to take shelter in these mountains while waiting for extraction in 72 hours. When he had first spotted the SEAL team moving through the valley below, Patterson had assumed they were conducting their own independent operation and would complete their mission without complications. It was only when he observed the Taliban fighters moving into ambush positions that he realized the Americans were walking into a sophisticated trap. Patterson faced an impossible decision. His orders were specific: maintain concealment, avoid contact with enemy forces, and preserve his intelligence mission above all else. Revealing his position to help the trapped SEALs would compromise his own mission and likely result in his death when Taliban forces redirected their attention toward his location. But watching fellow Americans die when he possessed the capability to help them was not something Patterson could accept. He had spent 12 years in the Army, including 4 tours in Afghanistan and Iraq, and had never abandoned other soldiers in need. Today would not be the first time. The technical challenges of what he was attempting were enormous. The distance to target exceeded 800 meters across mountainous terrain with unpredictable wind patterns. His targets were partially concealed and would be aware of his presence after the first shot, making follow-up engagements significantly more difficult. Most critically, he would need to eliminate multiple threats quickly enough to create a meaningful tactical advantage for the pinned-down SEALs. Patterson had identified 5 key enemy positions that posed the greatest threat to the American team. 2 Taliban fighters controlled the high ground with clear fields of fire covering any withdrawal route. Another position held what appeared to be the enemy commander, coordinating the overall assault through radio communications. The 4th target operated the mortar system that would eventually destroy the Americans' defensive position. The 5th position contained a sniper who had been systematically improving his shots against the SEAL team. The sequence of his engagement would be critical. Patterson decided to begin with the mortar crew, since indirect fire represented the most immediate threat to the Americans' survival. His 2nd target would be the enemy sniper, eliminating the Taliban's most accurate long-range shooter. The 3rd shot would target the enemy commander, disrupting their coordination and communication. The final 2 shots would engage the fighters controlling the high ground, hopefully creating enough chaos to allow the SEALs to move to better positions. Patterson's first shot was a masterpiece of long-range precision shooting. The bullet traveled for nearly 3 seconds before striking the Taliban mortar operator center mass, killing him instantly and rendering the indirect fire system useless. The shot had been fired from such extreme range that the sound of the rifle discharge wouldn't reach enemy positions for several additional seconds, giving Patterson time for immediate follow-up shots. His 2nd target, the enemy sniper, was partially concealed behind rock formations but had exposed himself while trying to acquire a better shooting position against the SEALs. Patterson's bullet struck him in the upper torso, spinning him around and dropping him behind his cover where he remained motionless. The Taliban commander presented a more challenging target due to his movement and the limited exposure of his position. Patterson waited for nearly 15 seconds until the target moved to a location where he could achieve a clean shot. The 3rd bullet found its mark, eliminating the enemy's coordination capabilities and leaving individual fighter groups without centralized command. By the time Patterson engaged his 4th target, Taliban fighters had begun to realize they were being engaged from an unexpected direction. Return fire began impacting around his position, but the extreme range and his carefully chosen concealment made accurate counterfire nearly impossible for enemies armed with assault rifles and without optical sights. The 4th shot eliminated one of the fighters controlling high ground positions, opening a potential withdrawal route for the American team. Patterson immediately shifted his aim toward the 5th target while bullets from multiple enemy positions began striking closer to his location. He was rapidly running out of time before enemy fire forced him to abandon his shooting position. The 5th and final shot was taken under the most difficult conditions yet. Enemy bullets were impacting within meters of his position, dust and debris were affecting his vision, and the target had begun taking evasive action after witnessing the elimination of his nearby comrades. Patterson controlled his breathing, ignored the incoming fire, and squeezed the trigger with the same precision that had made him one of the Army's most accomplished snipers. The bullet struck its target just as Patterson rolled away from his shooting position to avoid the increasing volume of return fire. 5 shots, 5 targets eliminated, and the tactical situation in the valley below had been transformed from hopeless to survivable. Patterson immediately began moving to a new position, knowing that Taliban fighters would soon converge on his last known location. His intervention had bought the SEALs critical time and tactical advantages, but his own survival now depended on remaining invisible while enemy forces searched for him. Down in the valley, Morrison led his team toward the stream bed that Cooper had identified as their best route to higher ground. The mysterious sniper's intervention had eliminated the most immediate threats to their movement, but dozens of enemy fighters remained in the area and would soon reorganize their assault. The stream bed provided exactly the concealment Cooper had hoped for, a natural trench carved by seasonal water flow that allowed the team to move while remaining below the sight lines of most enemy positions. Morrison led the way with Thompson close behind, both men moving in tactical bounds while their teammates provided overwatch and security. Shinha